Well, Ben Roberts-Smith, a name no longer prefaced with war hero. Dr. Matt Collins, KC, is a leading expert in defamation law and he joins me now. I appreciate your time. It's been a big day and I'm not sure anyone really knew how it was going to play out. What did you make of the findings?
It's obviously a good day for serious investigative journalism. It's a good day for Nine. It's a good day for the journalists who've been vindicated. But it's a terrible day for everybody else. And it's a terrible day, obviously, for Ben Roberts-Smith, who's had a catastrophic failure. But I sort of think more about the brave men and women of our defence forces, on whom this reflects, and the vast majority of them serve our country with honour. And it's a shameful day for Australia. I think one of the findings the judge made today was that Ben Roberts-Smith had disgraced not just himself, not just the Australian Defence Force, but also Australia. And, we should all reflect on that.
To be sitting here and talking about the findings that we heard today, I mean, to call out our most decorated soldier as a war criminal, as a murderer, it was a huge gamble by the newspapers, right? Yeah,
so it's incredibly unusual in the modern era with the media's business models having been disrupted by the internet and the fragmentation of viewing audiences. It's increasingly unusual to see serious investigative journalism of this scale. And these were stories that obviously Nine backed its reporters. The case reportedly cost $25 million to run. There aren't many media organisations left who can afford to defend cases of that kind. Luckily for Nine and for the journalists, they've been vindicated.
Look, Matt, I think there are a lot of people who feel really uncomfortable with the whole thing. We send our soldiers into a war zone and we ask them to put their lives on the line. Do we back home have the right to judge what happens on the battlefield?
Look, I think obviously we don't understand what happens on the battlefield. We ask these people to put on the uniform and to represent us, but that's the key to it, Ali. They are representing us when they're on the battlefield, and there are laws of war. And we must enforce laws of war when there are breaches. And one of the disturbing aspects of this case has been that it required the media to investigate, report on and defend the allegations rather than seeing a war crimes trial before a jury in a criminal court.
And if we don't do that, if we don't call it out, what happens?
Well, I think it affects Australia's reputation. I mean, imagine if the situation was reversed and the Australian Defence Force was working with an ally on a foreign battlefield and it was found by a credible court that our allies had committed war crimes of the kind that have been found by Justice Bazanko today. We'd rightly be horrified that our soldiers were in an alliance of that kind. So these are very serious matters, and there are very serious matters to be called to account.
We have seen there are headlines about this all around the world today. So does this damage those military relationships that we have? Well,
I think obviously our allies are going to be asking questions about, what has been done to ensure that this kind of conduct is stamped out. What is being done to ensure that the culture of our defence forces is right. Now, I want to stress that obviously the vast majority of the members of our defence forces, serve with distinction and with pride, and we should be proud of them. But this is the leadership of the Australian Defence Force found today in a court, in a vigorously defended action, a soldier to have committed war crimes.
I mean, as you say, it is a dark and it's a very difficult day for our military. What happens with his Victoria Cross medal now? Will he be stripped of that honour?
So that remains to be seen. He was awarded the Victoria Cross in 2011 and by the Governor-General, and the award was for his service in Afghanistan. Now, as a result of today's verdict, we now know that at the time he was awarded the Victoria Cross, Justice Bazanko has found he had committed 2 murders in 2009. And I think you'd ask yourself, well, if that information had been available in 2011, would he have been awarded the Victoria Cross? So I have no doubt that that's a matter that will be looked at.
At the heart of this, and you did just touch on it, you had soldiers exposing one of their own. How significant is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible thing, isn't it, that here you had very brave members of the Australian Defence Force assisting the media to prove allegations of the greatest gravity against Australia's most decorated war hero. I mean, they are real heroes to come forward at really nothing in it for them other than to act with integrity, to do us proud by exposing matters which needed to be exposed.
Because that's certainly not how they have been portrayed over the past couple of months and years. They've been belittled, and look, at the end of the day, they never wanted to be dragged into a defamation case. They had to be subpoenaed to give evidence. But when they were on the stand, They spoke their truth. How much do we owe them for that?
Well, a lot, because at the end of the day in this case, the only defence that Nine relied on, the journalists relied on, was a defence of truth. So they set out to prove that the things that these very brave sources were saying were true. And the judge was faced with just a diametrically opposed position. Ben Roberts-Smith vigorously denied any involvement in any of the allegations and produced witnesses to support his version of events. These brave people supported Nine's account of what happened, and at the end of the day, the judge has found that their evidence is to be preferred. Now, we haven't seen the judgment yet, and of course we'll need to pore over that when it comes out, but it must follow from the judge's findings that Ben Roberts-Smith has been found to have lied.
And of course we'll see that full judgment, the long judgment, at 2 o'clock on Monday. But just how bad was today for Ben Roberts-Smith?
Well, it's catastrophic. I mean, he gambled everything on a defamation case against the media and has come out as the comprehensive loser of the case. And of course, money's one aspect of it. Of course, the costs are eye-watering, and at the end of the day, he'll have to pay not only his own costs, but the costs of Nine and the journalists of defending the case. But more, the consequences really are in the judge's findings that, to the civil standard, he's been found to have committed murder and assault and to be a bully.
Let's just talk about that, the civil standard, because it is incredibly important, because the judge found that he murdered or was complicit in the murder of 4 unarmed Afghans. And I guess that's a small justice for those families. But they're not criminal convictions. As you say, they are findings to a civil standard. What is the difference?
Look, it's a very important point. So Ben Roberts-Smith has not been charged with anything. He's not been convicted of anything. He's been found by Justice Bazanko today on the balance of probabilities. That is, it's more likely than not that he did the things that Nine had accused him of, murder and so on.
Not everything was proven, including the domestic violence allegations, but the judge ruled that he wasn't defamed. Can you explain that to me?
Well, he was defamed in the sense that Nine attacked his reputation, but it was justifiable, the judge found, because the reports were substantially true. The critical allegations were true, and insofar as there were things which weren't proved by Nine to be true, they were sort of overwhelmed or swamped by the effect of the true allegations.
We talked about at the beginning how no one really knew how today was going to play out. Did it surprise you how the case fell? Because I think a lot of the talk in the lead up to today was that it was going to be messy. There'd be wins here but losses here on both sides. Yeah,
and that happened in a sense, that the judge found that Ben Roberts-Smith was right in the way in which he characterised what Nine was saying in the articles. But then the judge found for Nine in relation to most of the serious allegations and for Ben Roberts-Smith in relation to some of the less serious allegations. But because the serious allegations swamped the less serious allegations, Ben Roberts-Smith has failed entirely. But yeah, it is surprising. We don't see many cases where the media comes out so comprehensively the victor in defamation cases of this scale.
Which is why there wasn't a whole lot of confidence on either side, perhaps going into today. You talked about what happens now. Nine is seeking costs. Who actually picks up that bill?
Well, according to the media reports, Ben Roberts-Smith's prosecution of the case has been funded by Kerry Stokes or interests associated with Kerry Stokes. I mean, don't forget that Ben Roberts-Smith is the General Manager of Channel 7 in Brisbane, which is another interesting feature of the case. The cost will be eye-watering at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we're being told that he has 42 days to appeal, so it may not be quite the end.
Yeah, so the judgment will be available to pore over from next Monday. I would expect many hundreds of pages, and I'm sure that Ben Roberts-Smith's lawyers will be licking their wounds and reading that very closely with a view to identifying whether there's any prospect of an appeal.
OK, maybe not quite the end yet. Thank you, Matt, so much for that. Appreciate your time. And look, we thank our military for their service and for everything they sacrifice. What happened today to one man does not reflect on them.